Welcome to the most comprehensive college football talk in 30 minutes you'll find anywhere on the web as we offer up the latest on key injuries, odds, trends, and picks. As the OFN on PSN starts now. Thanks for tuning in to the Ourlads Football Radio Network as we preview Week 7 in college football. We're going to start with the key games from noon through 11 Eastern. Then we'll work our way back again with the rest of the games. Keep in mind we'll be posting a full in-depth injury suspension report prior to the games tomorrow at Ourlads.com. And we'll tweet out the report link when it's ready, which is why you should follow us at PrimeSN. For NFL fans, you can check out our Week 7 NFL preview show on demand from yesterday on the Ourlads.com blog page. All right, so let's get right to it. Lot to cover. And we do have games tonight, of course, so we've got to remind you about that. And Clemson, one of the top teams in college football. Maybe they're the top team. They're the defending champs. They're heavy favorites. No reason they shouldn't be. Quarterback's okay, Bryant. These games you never know about. It's national TV. And we talked about liking Wake Forest to cover Clemson for the reason that, well, sometimes Clemson plays those games, and they kind of played that game last week. But Wake Forest has got a really good defense. Syracuse does not. National TV, it'll work for you and against you, depending on which team you are. I can imagine this working for Syracuse a little bit, but Clemson is just way too talented. So not touching the game, though. It's too many points. Washington State at California. And that game is possibly more interesting. The line is 15 for Washington State. And California, now, they've got some issues to deal with. Right now, their number one running back, Patrick Laird, who's rushing right now. I think he's got 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, may not play tonight, so keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, their number 2 running back, Trey Watson, their number 2 running back last year, he had 709 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's already out for the year. He was injured in week 2 against Weber State. So Vic and Weary would take over. Last year he had 336 yards. This year he has 173 yards, but still a little bit of a drop-off because Laird has done a really good job as the Bears' number 1 running back. So keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, number 2 wide receiver, this kid Kanawe Noah, is also questionable tonight. He's got 24 receptions, 373 yards. So last year, the number 2 wide receiver, actually, if you take a look at the Cal situation between the running backs and receivers, we mentioned Noah, but Demetrius Robertson, who had 50 receptions, 767 yards, and 7 touchdowns last year. He was their number 2 wide receiver behind Chad Hansen. Of course, Hansen's in the NFL now with the Jets. He was also injured in week 2 against Weber State. And Robertson's situation for California is just going to go ahead and check it, just make sure I have the right updated information. Is that he's been out, not like as I mentioned, out since week 2, but he's not going to play. Matter of fact, it doesn't even look like he's going to be back this year, so that's a big blow. Laird, of course, is just a questionable tonight, so there's no major thing there. But with Robertson out for the year, and with Noah questionable tonight, you throw in the fact that Melqui Stovall, who was their number 3 receiver last year, has been out all year. So they're really banged up at the skill position. And this is a team that got off to a good start this year. But all of a sudden, those wins against Mississippi and North Carolina don't look so good right now because those teams aren't playing well. And even the 10-point loss to USC doesn't look all that great. But they got blown out at Oregon. Even when Oregon had some issues at quarterback, that's when Herbert was banged up. But then after that, they got blown out at Washington last week. So Washington State playing great ball. Not a good time for Cal to play him. But they're at home. Just too many injuries for Cal, though. Again, without their number 1 receiver and their number 2 wide receiver. Excuse me, with their number 1 running back and their number 2 receiver questionable. And then, of course, all the other injuries that I mentioned. With Trey Watson, one of their top running backs, out since week 2, and Demetrius Robertson, the top returning receiver from last year out since week 2 as well, with Robertson out for the year and Watson out for the year. By the way, as I mentioned at the top, you can check out all of the details on these injuries when we post them up on the website. So we'll be able to give you a clear description of exactly what's going on with all these players. Of course, we're not going to cover the Friday guys, though, because we'll probably get the report up in the next few hours. If we do get it up before the game tonight, we'll post the California injuries up there. Maybe we'll even have an update by then. But if not, we're going to hold off on anything from Fridays, which we usually do anyway, because most of the time we get them in on late Fridays and into Saturday mornings. All right, so that's what's going on. 15-point spread, Washington State at Cal. Cal's lost 3 straight, but they have covered both games at home. Washington State, meanwhile, has covered 4 straight games, and we'll see if they can remain undefeated at 7-0. All right, let's go to Saturday games. And Florida State and Duke. Let's start with that one in the ACC at noon. And Florida State is also, by the way, dealing with injuries. So if you take a look at the Seminoles injury situation, and really Florida State and Florida, both teams banged up after last week's game. That was a real physical game. But Florida State has injuries to 3 receivers. Now the number 1 receiver, Auden Tate, looks like he's going to be okay. He's been dealing with an AC separation on his left shoulder. He's been playing with it all year, and he's supposed to play with it again tomorrow. But their number 2 receiver, Keith Gavin, is out, and their number 3 receiver, George Campbell, is questionable with a hip injury. Tate is their leading receiver with 282. Gavin is next with 145. Tate 16 receptions, Gavin 15. So Gavin will be missed. And definitely they'll miss Campbell if they'll be very shorthanded if Campbell misses the game as well. Linebacker Pugh and safety Trey Marshall are also out with concussion injuries to Florida State, and left guard Landon Dickerson's out for the year with an ankle injury. So Florida State dealing with a lot of injuries going into this game after the Miami game. They're 0-3-1 against the spread this year, but they're 19-0 all-time versus Duke. So is this the right time for Duke to get a win? Well, we thought that might have been possible against Miami. You know, Miami, Florida State dominated the series, of course, against Duke, but Duke got beat bad by Miami a couple of weeks ago. Lost to Virginia last week. So all of a sudden, Duke, after a really good start to the season at 4-0, they've dropped their last 2. But if you watch the Florida State game, you know what we've been talking about. The Seminoles are not very good offensively, offensive line issues, young quarterback, and all of that. By the way, Florida State not only has won all 19 against Duke, but 6-0 against the spread in the last 6 against Duke. Even though, keep in mind, they haven't played since 2013. And that game was the ACC title game won by Florida State, 45-7. So trends that you probably don't want to pay too much attention to when they haven't played in 3 years. All right. And by the way, 7.5 spread for Florida State, 1-3. If they lose the game, they're 1-4. Not sure I could take Florida State in this game, but I don't know if I could take Duke to push Florida State to 1-4. I think that'd be a little too much. Anyway, if I was going to take the game, I probably would take the Noles. All right. Let's move on to Michigan, Indiana at 12 o'clock. Michigan 4-1, Indiana 3-2. Michigan favored by 7.5. Michigan 35-1 all time versus the Hoosiers. And another situation where, hey, you know what? If Indiana is going to win another game, maybe this is it. O'Korn was lousy last week. Is that a big surprise? I've been talking about it all season. As a Michigan fan, I'm absolutely disgraced about what's going on there with the quarterback situation. I can't understand what Jim Harbaugh is doing. This is a guy that is going to do, and he's already done great things for this program, and he will continue to do even better things once either Brandon Peters or Dylan McCaffrey take over. Because these kids know, especially McCaffrey, as I've said before, they really love him. He's got the bloodlines in the family. And the theme of this show, too, is going to be, as you'll see, players. I've been saying this for years. I've said it a lot already this season in the NFL and college football shows. It drives me nuts that these coaches don't give backups a chance when the starters, at especially the skill positions, aren't doing their job. But they're veterans, they have more experience, they look better in practice, and then all of a sudden it takes an injury. Then the backup plays, and then lo and behold, holy smoke, I didn't realize they would be better. They don't play like this in practice. So it drives you nuts. Anyway, you know what? I would take Indiana. I really would. O'Korn's terrible. He just is. Oh, they want to use the excuse it was raining and all of that. It's nonsense. He's got no confidence whatsoever right now. And the fact that Harbaugh wouldn't let Peters go into that game last week when they could have still won that football game tells you that, you know what? I don't even know if he's going to replace him if they're losing this game. And if that's the case, then I feel pretty good about taking Indiana. And you know what? I might even take the money line. Let's see what else. BYU at Mississippi State, not a big game, but it would have been a big game a couple years ago. Mississippi State favored by 24. They've lost their last two, but you know what those two games were against? Georgia Auburn on the road. BYU's 0-6 against the spread this year for a reason. Their quarterback play continues to be absolutely terrible. Mississippi State also has revenge after losing it in overtime to BYU last year. So yes, I would take the Bulldogs, even though I'm giving up 24. Let's see, what else do we have here? Tell you what, let's move on to TCU and Kansas State, also at 12 o'clock. Now, keep in mind, this is a quarterback injury situation for Kansas State, as Jesse Ertz is out with a knee injury, or at least he's most likely out with a knee injury. And that means that Alex Delton will make his first career start. He had 79 rushing yards last week and 2 touchdowns. He helped Kansas State come back against Texas, almost won that game in overtime. So he was able to do a good job. Now, he's not a passer, but, you know, and neither is Ertz, to tell you the truth. But Delton, sort of like built in the same mold as Ertz. They want to run the ball. Ertz is the Wildcats' leading rusher, 336 yards, 3 touchdowns. They'll miss that a lot more than his passing, even though he's a better passer than Delton. It's a 6-point spread for TCU. You know what? I'm still going to go with Kansas State in this game. I've said before, there's no way TCU is going to run the table. If Oklahoma State loses and Oklahoma loses, Kansas State's going to lose too. TCU is going to lose too. They're just not that good. Especially, I'm not comfortable with the quarterback. I've said that before. So this is maybe a good spot on the road. Maybe a letdown because they're facing the backup. Kansas State, by the way, 8-2 against the spread the last 10 as a home dog. I'm going to go ahead with the outright upset there, Kansas State over TCU. Texas Tech at West Virginia. And the Red Raiders have had a very good season. They're 4-1 straight up, 5-0 against the spread this year. So that just shows you that they're playing a lot better than people thought that they were going to play, with their only loss, a 7-point loss to Oklahoma State. West Virginia, meanwhile, is a 3.5-point favorite in this game. They've won 3 straight against the Red Raiders, but they haven't beaten anybody. They beat East Carolina, Delaware State, and Kansas. So that's not very impressive. I'll tell you what, I'm taking Texas Tech. They're getting 3.5, so I can get 4, so I'm happy with that. And I think this will be a close game. But I think Texas Tech has been a better team this year, and they haven't done anything disappointing just yet. So I'll go ahead and take the Red Raiders plus the 4 in that one. Let's go on to the Georgia Tech-Miami game at 3:30. And as I said just a little while ago, Miami is dealing with injuries. And, of course, Mark Walton is the biggest one. So their big-time running back is out for the year, and that is a big blow. And that means with Walton out, they're going to go now to Travis Homer, a sophomore. Now, Homer played at the end of the game last week on the final drive when Miami marched down the field and beat Florida State. He's got a lot of talent, so even though it's a drop-off because Walton had 1,100 yards last year, Homer is still having a good season. He's averaging 8 yards a carry on 25 attempts and 3 rushing touchdowns. So I don't think they're going to miss that Walton that much, to be honest with you. But their top corner, D. Delaney's out. And their starting free safety, Sheldrick Redwine, is out. So they do have some secondary issues, but you know what? That's not going to matter against Georgia Tech because they don't throw the ball. Armon Richards banged up with a hamstring injury. He was their one of their top 2 receivers last year. Coley, of course, in the NFL now. But Richards is kind of banged up this year. He missed the first 2 games, came back the last 2 games. Probably plays on Saturday, but just keep in mind it's a hamstring injury. They still have Berrios and the tight end Herndon. So against Georgia Tech, maybe they'd be okay there. I'm not saying Georgia Tech's not a good team. We'll get to that in a second. Also keep in mind Navon Donaldson, their true freshman guard, is out, and they like him a lot. They think he's done a really good job this year. Anyway, for Georgia Tech, they've only lost 1 game this year. That was in overtime to Tennessee to start the season. But the 3 wins are against Pitt, not a good team. North Carolina, not a good team. And Jacksonville State, well, not even FBS. But they did blow them all out. So there's that. Now, check out these conflicting trends. Miami, which makes it very difficult, might want to stay away from the 6.5-point spread for the Hurricanes. Miami's 8-2-1 in their last 11 games as a home favorite, so that's a good thing. They're also 7-1 straight up and against the spread in their last 8 versus Georgia Tech. So you might want to take Miami, right? Well, look at Georgia Tech, and they're 6-2 against the spread their last 8 as away dogs. So that means they are doing a lot better than people think they're going to do when they go on the road in these spots. But this is their first true road game of the year. So there's that as well. Plus, Miami's coming off the emotional win against Florida State. They're 4-0. You know what? I'm looking for an upset. I might do it here. I'm very well considering taking Georgia Tech plus the 7 to outright upset and win this game. Okay, now let's go to, that was 3:30. Let's go to the Red, whatever they're calling it nowadays. What are they calling it nowadays? The Red River Shootout. Let me see what they're calling it nowadays. I remember that there was, or maybe they don't do that anymore. Is it like politically incorrect to call it a shootout anymore? I don't know. Let me see what they're calling it nowadays. Let's see. Maybe they're still calling it that. They're calling it the... Well, I'm not getting it there. Wait, what is it? Red River Shootout. Yeah, maybe it is still the Red River Shootout. Okay, good for them. Well, hopefully. Anyway, like I care, right? As far as being politically correct. Anyway, Oklahoma's favored by 9 in the game. Texas has won 2 of their last 3 games in overtime this year. So they've won some close games. Keep in mind that they've won 2 out of their last 3 with 2 of those games in overtime. So that's a little bit different than 3 straight overtime games. Just want to get that straight. So overtime loss to USC. You remember that one. That was a 3-point loss. They beat Iowa State by 10 on the road, and then they hosted Kansas State last week and beat them in overtime. So they're 1-1 in overtime games in 2 of their last 3 games. Meanwhile, Texas is 3-0-1 against the spread in their last 4 this year since the Maryland loss. So that loss, an anomaly. This is a better team. And Maryland was a pretty decent team too. Of course, they've had some injuries, but that was still an anomaly. I'm not saying Texas is better than Oklahoma. They're not. But Texas is 2-2 straight up, 4-0 against the spread the last 4 times they've played the Sooners, with all of those 4 games as double-digit dogs and 2 outright upsets as 16 and 14-point dogs. So again, Texas is getting 9 in this one. And, that's probably where I would go. I'm not going to go ahead and take Oklahoma to lose 2 straight, but I'll take Texas to cover 9. All right, let's go on to, let's see. Why don't we stick with, I'm trying to see what would be considered a good game. Well, you know what? Wisconsin is a 17-point favorite. Let's talk about them because they're one of the top teams. They're one of our sleeper picks to win the national championship. What do we have them at? 33-1, I think. Wisconsin 5-0 on the season. Keep in mind, they one of the things that they are, and we talked about this with Dan Shanka on Wednesday's show about the fact that they have a very good receiver, Jazz Peavy, who was their best receiver last year. And you're probably going, yeah, I don't see him doing anything this year. Well, that's because he's really been dealing with a lingering leg injury, so much so that they're gonna hold him out of the game this week. So they got to get him healthy because they're really gonna need him down the stretch. They're 17-point favorite against Purdue. A Purdue team, as we noted last week, is without their top rusher, Fuller. Fuller's out. And also their number 1 tackler, TJ McCollum, the linebacker, who's got 40 on the season, is doubtful with a knee injury. So a couple of significant injuries for Purdue. Wisconsin has won 11 straight times against Purdue, covering 10 of 11, with the last 9 wins by the Badgers by 17 points or more. So again, Wisconsin favored by 17 in that game. I probably would go with Wisconsin. I wouldn't take Purdue. But 17's a lot because Purdue, we've been high on them all year, as you know. Brom's done a great job with that program, but this is a major step up in competition for them. Auburn and LSU is also at 3:30. And even though Auburn's Cameron Petway's out, with a heel injury. I don't think that's a big deal. We talked about the fact that we were very upset at a few decisions early on in the season, the quarterback situation at Auburn, but that had to do more with the fact that Sean White ended up with some issues, and that's a whole long story that we'll get into another time. But the other thing was that Karen Johnson did not get a snap in the Clemson game, and Cam Martin are good running backs. So even with Petway out with the injury, and he had 1,200 yards rushing last year, the top runner this year is Karan Johnson. And Johnson did not even get into the Clemson game, which he should have, because Petway is basically a straight ahead guy. He doesn't have a lot of quick speed like Johnson's faster. And when you're going up against that Clemson defense and they're just going to hog you at the line, you're not going to be able to move the ball very much that way with a straight ahead kind of plotter, physical guy like Petway. Johnson, though, never got a snap. Anyway, so I'm not worried about Petway's not in the game against Auburn because Johnson is there. He had 12 touchdowns last year. Excuse me, he has 12 touchdowns already this year. Excuse me. And he had 11 all of last year. So Johnson already having a great season. So don't worry about Petway being out. For LSU, okay, they beat Florida, big deal. This is a team that lost to Troy, lost by 30 to Mississippi State, and they beat a Florida ravaged team. They beat Syracuse, Chattanooga, and BYU, who stinks. This is not a good LSU team. Auburn's favored by 7. I definitely like Auburn. They've beaten LSU 2 out of the last 3 years, and they have beaten their opponents by a 209 to 64 margin, while LSU just 1-4-1 against the spread this year. By the way, the home team in this series, if you want to go with LSU, is 7-1 over the last 8 years, both straight up and against the spread, but I won't be doing that. All right, let's see. Let's move on to, let me just, again, I'm going to stay with some of the other big games first, and then we're going to make a quick run through the rest. Let's see. Utah, USC. How about that? That's at 8 o'clock. Utah 4-1, USC 5-1. Remember last week we talked about the quarterback situation for Utah. I lost the spread in that game, and it just shows you why I don't really do too much with the spread. If you want to deal with the spread, you go with Tony Mejia at Vegas Insider. I'm here to talk about the games mostly, and also about futures. That's my thing. And that's the reason, because last week Stanford was beating Utah. Utah gets the garbage touchdown at the end to cover the spread when Stanford was definitely the better team. Love did what he had to do late in the game. Utah without the quarterback situation. Huntley, it looks like he's going to miss the game again. And as we mentioned last week, that was one of the big reasons we like Stanford in that game. Huntley is won the job for a reason. But the starter, he's out in this game against USC. Also, Kyle Pitts is a good player. He might miss his second straight game with a leg injury for the Utes. But look, Utah is 4-0-1 against the spread this year. USC is 1-5. So Utah's outperforming, USC underperforming. 13-point spread says to go with Utah, but I'll probably stay away from the game. I'm just not sold on Utah with the quarterback change. By the way, the home team in this series over the last 4 years is 4-0, straight up and against the spread. So there's that. All right, and let's see. I tell you what, a couple others late at night. Let's stick in the Pac-12 at 9 o'clock, and I want to mention this one. UCLA and Arizona, they're both 3-2. UCLA is going to play their first game without tight end, Caleb Wilson is out for the year, and that's I think that's a significant injury for Josh Rosen, even though he has good wide receivers. Wilson had really come from nowhere and done a really good job as a tight end. Really good production at the tight end position, and he is not there. But here's the big story out of Arizona, in case you missed it last week, and this is another lesson, okay, about the quarterback situation. But with Arizona, if you've been watching Arizona play this year, you'll know, going into the game last week, that one of the problems that they've had really over the last couple of years, they won 3 games last year, and of course they're not doing so well this year, and even didn't do all that great in 2015, is that they didn't have a good quarterback. Rich Rodriguez needs a good quarterback. He needs a good, speedy, athletic quarterback. Remember Denard Robinson, what kind of wonders they did for each other at Michigan. So Anyway, they're getting no production again at the quarterback position. It's just not a very good year. All right, they played a little bit better against Utah a few weeks earlier, and they kept that competitive, but it was still a sloppy game. The quarterback wasn't doing anything, and I'm talking about Dawkins. He's just not that good. So Dawkins gets injured. All right, leaves the game in the first quarter against Colorado. A game they were a touchdown dog, as they should have been a dog on the road. I think they were, yes, touchdown dog. So Khalil Tate comes into the game. All right, Khalil Tate, sophomore, comes into the game. You know what he does? He sets an FBS new rushing record for a quarterback in a single game. 327 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns on just 14 attempts. Was that crazy or what? And he went 12 of 13 for 153 yards and a touchdown passing. So who do you think's starting this week? Now, if Dawkins didn't get hurt, we would never see Tate. Maybe we'd see him in a few weeks. Maybe we'd see him at the end of the year. Maybe by then Arizona would be maybe in, maybe out of a bowl. But if this kid's for real, and I can't imagine he's not when you do that against Colorado's defense, then that could change everything for Rich Rodriguez for the next couple of years. So much so that I love Arizona. I mean, who I think about Jim Mora. So I love Arizona in that game. They're getting 2 at home against UCLA. Bruins are 1-4 against the spread this year, which is not a surprise because they're always disappointing. They're also 0-3-1 in their last 4 against the spread as a road favorite, even though they've dominated the Arizona series. So you do have to keep that in mind. They've won 5 straight against Arizona by a combined 215-100. So that does worry me a little bit. I believe in that rivalry stuff more in college than the pros. But, hey, you know what? Khalil Tate wasn't playing, so I'll take Arizona plus the 2. Texas A&M is playing Florida. That game actually a little bit earlier in the day. I skipped over those earlier games. Texas A&M, Florida favorite by 2.5, and Florida has been dealing with the suspensions all year, and of course also some of the injuries that occurred last week with wide receiver Tyree Cleveland. He does not look like he's going to play this week. Of course, Del Rio's out. They got no offense. I mean, they're just ugly to watch offensively. They have to win 10-9, 15-14 games. These two teams, A&M and the Gators, have only played one other time back in 2012. But look, A&M has lost 2 games. They lost by 8 to Alabama and 1 by UCLA on that comeback. So I'll take the Aggies in this one. I think they're a better team, especially with the injuries and the suspensions going on in Florida right now. And Arkansas is at Alabama. Alabama favored by 31.5. Even though it's a lot of points, I'm taking Alabama. Why not? They should annihilate Arkansas. Alabama doesn't have a problem blowing out teams at times, and neither does Ohio State. But it usually happens when they don't really care about the coach on the other sideline. And I think that's what you're going to see here. Alabama's won 10 straight against Arkansas, even though the last 3 games have been pretty competitive. But Arkansas is just a pretty bad team this year. They have wins over New Mexico State and FAMU, but they've lost to South Carolina by 26 points on the road, their only road game of the year, and now their second straight road game. And they've also lost to TCU and Texas A&M. So look, they're 0-4-1 against the spread for a reason. Alabama should annihilate them. Let's see what else. Georgia, by the way, is a 30-point home favorite against Missouri. Georgia 5-0 against the spread versus FBS teams this year. But this is a big number. I'm not sure I'm gonna take Georgia in that one, but maybe I should because Missouri covered their first game of the year last week in a competitive loss to Kentucky. But that's Kentucky, not Georgia. All right, and finally the real late games. Let's see. San Diego State only a 6.5-point favorite against Boise State. I say only because I don't think I've said this before a few times this year. I mean, Boise State's headed in the wrong direction. Okay, they've had some games where they've looked okay, and in other games they haven't looked good. But I've seen them play. They're not dynamic on offense. San Diego State's clearly a better team. And 6.5 at home. I mean, seriously. The Aztecs are 2-2 straight up, 4-0 against the spread all time as Mountain West Conference opponents. but they have not played since 2014, so keep that in mind. But that game's going to go off about 10:15 on Saturday night. Going off at 10:45 on Saturday night is Washington, 17-point favorite at Arizona State. Washington, of course, undefeated, trying to get to the postseason, at the playoffs again. Arizona State, though, you know what? Another team from Arizona. I think Todd Graham has his best team that he's had there in a few years. So maybe now there's some something happening there in Arizona for both programs. Manny Wilkins has improved himself at quarterback. They're coming off a bye to prepare this game. I tell you what, I like Arizona State in this game. I don't know if they could pull off the upset. It's not the worst idea in the world because Arizona State they've had Washington's number. They're 10-1 straight up, 11-0 against the spread the last 11 versus Washington. Even though Washington beat them last year, snapping their 10-game losing streak to the Sun Devils. But Arizona State, they've had competitive losses to Texas Tech, San Diego State, and Stanford by a combined 27 points. And then they have wins over Oregon. And then, by the way, when they beat Oregon with Justin Herbert at quarterback. So I think Arizona State's going to be in this game. I really do. So I'll take Arizona State to cover. And you know what? I might throw a little bit on the money line for the outright upset. And then finally, Oregon and Stanford at 11 o'clock with the Washington-Arizona State game at 10:45. Oregon, Herbert's still out, so their quarterbacks look pretty bad. We talked about it last week going into that game, which is why we really liked Washington State. And now they're playing on the road without Herbert. Stanford has won 3 straight. They're favored by 10.5. I have no problem laying the lumber there with Stanford to beat Oregon with all sorts of quarterback problems. They just do. They don't look good right now after getting off to a good start this year. But injuries are injuries. All right, so now we're going to run through the rest. Those are the top games going on this week. But let's go ahead and run through the rest of the games going on. Let me get them all here in order. Here we go. And we're going to start, as I mentioned, we're going to go back to the 12 o'clock games. All right, so here we go. Rutgers at Illinois. And Illinois is dealing with a potential running back issue. They don't have an offense. If you've been watching Illinois football, you know they have no offense. But the only player that really does anything for them on offense, their running back by the name of Epstein, he may not play in the game. So you need to keep an eye on that. He's got right now 346 yards and 3 touchdowns. The next guy in line has 83 yards. So if they lose Epstein, they're in big trouble. They're a 2.5 point favorite in that one at home against Rutgers. Let's see. UConn and Temple. I liked, as we talked about last week, I liked Temple a lot in that game last week against East Carolina because East Carolina is pretty bad. Well, you know what? UConn ain't much better. Plus, this game's at Temple. Why is this only 9.5? I have no idea. So I'll take Temple again. UConn has only won 1 game this year, and that's against Holy Cross. Temple, meanwhile, has beaten UConn all 3 times they've played them. And UConn has not covered a game in 9 straight. Okay, so yeah, I like Temple a lot in that one. All right, let's go to North Carolina State and Pittsburgh. Now, this is important because Pittsburgh is dealing with a quarterback injury. Max Brown, the transfer from USC, who is playing pretty well for Pitt, completing 71% of his passes, about 1,000 yards. Shoulder injury, out for the year. Now, this could be a good thing or a bad thing, even though Brown was playing well, because you never know what you're going to get, again, from the backups. Now, Ben DiNucci, not sure, he doesn't have the arm as Max Brown, a little bit more athletic and all that, but they seem to like the true freshman Kenny Pickett. So you just don't know. That would be the scary thing for me. If let's just put it this way, if the coaches were right that Brown's better, then North Carolina State looks good. 11 points on the road. They're playing great. They just beat Louisville. They've already beaten Florida State. We've talked about how we can't wait for the NC State-Clemson matchup. So, yeah, I like North Carolina State. Pitt has wins over Youngstown State in overtime and Rice. Okay? That's the kind of bad year it's been for Pitt. Now they lose their starting quarterback. So, but you never know. Now, Eastern Michigan and Army. This is another game I like as an outright upset. I like Eastern Michigan. I think you know that by now. Eastern Michigan just keeps losing close games, though. But they've been covering, which shows you that they've been losing close games. They've lost 3 straight games by a total of 12 points to good teams: Toledo, Ohio, 2 of the best teams in the MAC, and Kentucky from the SEC. Army's a nice team, but they have wins over Rice, UTEP, Buffalo, and Fordham. Okay? So they're supposed to win those games. I think Eastern Michigan's a better team than Army. I just do. So I'll take the 7, and especially since they're desperate. They're 2-3, and they need some wins. South Carolina and Tennessee. And yeah, Tennessee's bad. We've known that for weeks. They have nothing going on at quarterback. They're making a quarterback change to the kid to Guantano, whatever his name is. Anyway, South Carolina's just a better team. And I would go with South Carolina. Now, keep this in mind, though. The last 5 games in the series have been decided by 3 points or less in each of them. So if you're going to take this game, you might need some Tums. You might want to chew on some. Might be a long game. Okay, let's see. Let's also go to, let's see. Yeah, we could say the 2 o'clock game, UNLV and Air Force. Air Force has lost 4 straight, favored by 7.5. Now, get this one. Air Force is 0-8 against the spread the last 8 games after they play Navy. Okay? Now, they've won some of those games, but they haven't covered in 8 years since the emotional game against Navy. 7.5 point favorite at home against UNLV. Old Dominion and Marshall. And, I think Marshall looks like they're prepared. They're setting up to have a nice season. And the question will just be whether or not when they start playing, some better competition, exactly how they'll look. Now, they did play North Carolina State, but they lost. That was the only game they lost this year. They lost by 17, but it was on the road. So there's nothing wrong with that. And they even covered the game. So that shows you that, they played tough. Now they get Middle Tennessee State next week on the road. That's next Friday, a week from today. That's the first big game for them in the conference. And to tell you the truth, that's the toughest game they have all year. It's a very weak division right now in the Conference USA. It's actually, a weak conference this year because Western Kentucky is no good anymore. Even Louisiana Tech isn't as good as they were. That's why I think Marshall may not be a bad team to keep an eye on. Chase Litton's at quarterback. Doc Holliday's done a nice job there. 15.5 point spread against Old Dominion. And I'm thinking of maybe going with Marshall on that one. Let's see. Let's now move on to Ohio and Bowling Green. Bowling Green came out of nowhere to beat Miami last week. Miami of Ohio was 17-point dogs for their only win of the season. Plus, they're 4-2 in their last 6 against Ohio, their opponent this week. Covering all 6, they're a 10-point dog. They're at home. All right. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a game I'll stay away from because Ohio's clearly better. Let's see. Baylor and Oklahoma State. The Cowboys are a 26-point favorite. The Bears looking for their first win of the season. They've beaten the Cowboys 3 straight times by 10 points or more. NIU and Buffalo. Remember a couple weeks ago, we wrote in our injury report about that even though Buffalo had the injury to the quarterback, that we said, you know what? It could very well be a blessing in disguise. And that's exactly what happened so far. That's what's happened so far with Tyree Jackson going down because last week, and then we had Buffalo as an outright upset win over Western Michigan. And you can excuse us for losing the game 71-68 in 6 overtimes. But Drew Anderson, the backup quarterback, passed for a record, a MAC conference record, 597 yards with 7 touchdown passes and no picks. So, that's in a losing effort in 6 overtimes. Now, that's the thing that would concern me is because the line is shot up to almost 7. I think people are thinking Buffalo is going to be emotionally spent in the game here. Plus, Northern Illinois has beaten Buffalo all 9 times as MAC opponents. So there's that too. But look, if Buffalo can just play like they did last week, they'll catch a break and win this week. But that is the question. But you know what I like? I like the fact that they're getting 7. All right. So I'll take Buffalo again for a second straight week in an outright upset. Virginia, we've been really hot on Virginia with Brocco Mendenhall since the win against Boise State. And now last week, Kurt Benkert did not look good at all compared to the way he looked against Boise. But they escaped with the win. That's all that matters. They're a better team than North Carolina right now. But the Tar Heels have won 7 straight in the series with Virginia. And keep that in mind. But I'll go with Virginia. Why not? It's 3 points. It's a very small number. Virginia's a better team, but they got to play better. If they again, Benkert has got to play more like the quarterback we saw at Boise, and not the one we saw at Duke, and they should win that game. Big game for Virginia. That'd give them the 5 wins already on the season, and be that much closer to bowl eligibility for the first time since 2011. Here's a good one in the MAC. Toledo and Central Michigan. Now keep these injuries keep these injuries updated here. Now Central Michigan, and I want to make sure people understand this too when we put our injury reports together. And I said this in the first injury report we posted a few weeks ago. This is not like the NFL. You never know, unless the coach says it in quotes that a player is not going to play. You never know if a player is going to play or not that week. Now you can guess he's not going to play. He hasn't, like for instance, Tyler Conklin hadn't played all season for Central Michigan. Big part of their offense, the tight end. And there was no word out that he was going to play last week. Nothing. And he hadn't played all year. So, and we even mentioned in our report about a week or two ago how Central Michigan, if you take a look at how they played with or without a couple of key guys, Conklin and wide receiver Corey Willis, like the first 2 games of the season with their star receiver Willis, they won the first 2. Then Willis is out games 3, 4, and 5. Of course, Conklin's out too. They lose all 3. Willis gets a uniform back on last week, but doesn't play. Conklin returns 10-point road dog at Ohio, and they win. Conklin, 10 receptions, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. Big part of the offense for Central Michigan. Now, we believe, because Willis was almost ready to play last week, that he very well might play this week. And that's why I think Central Michigan's a good play. They're getting 7.5 against Toledo, and not just because of that. And by the way, again, Willis is a big-time receiver for them. Second team MAC last year, over 1,000 yards receiving, and already off to a good start this year before the injury after week 2. But for Toledo, if you look at their injury situation, they have both their leading runner, Terry Swanson, who's dealing with an ankle injury, may not play. He's got 355 and 5 touchdowns. Even though their number 2 running back, Art Tompkins, is a pretty decent backup with 337. But their number 1 receiver in yards, Cody Thompson, is out for the year with a leg injury for Toledo. 28 receptions, 537 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, Deontay Johnson's still there, and he's a good one. He's also got 28 receptions, 460, and 5 touchdowns. But still, you lose Cody Thompson and maybe Swanson. Those could be big blows for Toledo. And then Central Michigan, maybe they get a boost with Willis back along with Conklin. So I think Central Michigan's a nice play. 8-point dog at home against Toledo. Keep in mind, though, Toledo 7-0 the last 7 years, straight up and against the spread versus Central Michigan. Let's see what else we got here. Northwestern at Maryland, and can you believe it that we're about to tell you that, yes, Maryland is dealing once again with a quarterback injury, potentially. Max Bortenschlager, who suffered a head injury last week in the third quarter against Ohio State. He'll be a game-time decision. Now, I don't think this is going to be that big of a deal because Caleb Henderson, who came in relief last week, finally was able to play, who would, by the way, be the 4th starting quarterback for them this year, all because of injuries. Henderson, there was a lot of people who thought Henderson was going to start the season for the Terps. Henderson was dealing with a foot injury that he sustained in the spring. So if he plays, I don't think it's a blow at all for Maryland. He might even be better than Bortenschlager. But Shane Cockrell, who was their number one tackler last year with 108 tackles, he's not going to play. He's facing disciplinary action. He's got some sort of off the field stuff going on there. So, and keep in mind, Maryland's already dealing without their number one sack leader, who's out with an injury from last year. So they've got a lot of injuries, Maryland. For Northwestern, they're a 3-point favorite in this game against the Terps on the road. First meeting between these two teams is and first of many more, of course, is Big Ten teams. But also for Northwestern, now this is a player that we're going to talk a lot about with our draft coverage with Dan Shanka. Godwin Igwebuike, targeting issue last week, supposed to be suspended in the first half. He's Northwestern's top pro prospect. So that's something to keep in mind there. All right, Navy and Memphis. Memphis favored by 3 at home. Big game in the AAC. Undefeated Navy, 4-1 Memphis. Navy's beaten Memphis in both matchups the last 2 years by an 87-48 margin. So this would be a good game. I think I like Navy a little bit better than Memphis, but this is definitely a good game though. Can go either way. Tough game to call. Let's see. Colorado at Oregon State. No more Gary Anderson. He's out. Corey Hall will take over the head coaching duties. Oregon State has not beaten an FBS team this year. All 5 of their losses this year have been by 28 points or more. Colorado, a 10-point favorite here. Colorado should be the play, but you never know about the coaching change thing. That's always difficult. But I think Colorado's the play there. Keep in mind, when Colorado lost last week to Arizona, it wasn't a bad loss. I told you what happened with Arizona's quarterback. So it wasn't like it was a terrible loss to a bad team. So, but Colorado's just not the same team they were last year. They had, a lot of key guys graduated. Everybody knew this was going to be a rebuild year for the Buffaloes. Appalachian State and Idaho in the Sun Belt's at 5 o'clock. And the Mountaineers have won all 3 years against Idaho by 17 points or more, favored by 13 in that one. Georgia State at Louisiana Monroe. Monroe favored by 7.5. And Georgia State's won 2 straight. But it's their 4th straight road game. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a lot of road games in a row for Georgia State. We've told you before that we like Monroe. New Mexico State's dealing with a potential injury to their running back, so you want to keep that in mind. Matter of fact, their running back has had a nice career. Larry Rose, 3,618 yards rushing over his first 3 years. He's got 492 this year and 3 touchdowns. But even if he doesn't play, Jason Huntley's off to a good start, ready to take over for Rose when he graduates. He's already averaging 8 yards a carry. New Mexico State has had a nice year, but they haven't had a lot of wins to show for it. So I expect them to fully win this game, favored by 7 against Georgia Southern. Let's see. Middle Tennessee State still dealing with injuries to the quarterback and their elite receiver, Richie James. But you know what the story is here is UAB. The fact that Middle Tennessee is only favored by 4, what a great thing going on. We haven't talked a lot about it yet, but this is a nice story. Bill Clark is doing a phenomenal job with this UAB program. They disappeared, of course, for the last 2 years. They're back. They didn't play, so they're back, and they're actually they beat Louisiana Tech last week. I mean, they lost to a decent North Texas team on the road. They beat Coastal Carolina, Alabama, and A&M, but the Louisiana Tech win was a nice win. So I don't know. You keep an eye on UAB. That's all I'm going to say, especially with Middle Tennessee State playing their backup quarterback, it looks like, again, and maybe no Richie James. Speaking of North Texas, I like them as a 3-point home dog against Texas San Antonio. I've mentioned this before. I like Seth Luttrell. I like what he's going to do there at North Texas. They played well last year, enough to get to a bowl. I know they didn't have 6 wins, but still, that was something for them. And so I like the improvement here at the program. And I think they're very capable of beating Texas San Antonio. Texas San Antonio lost last week at home to Southern Miss as a 10-point favorite. So I like the Mean Green in that one. 3-point home dog. Central Florida, of course, you know what I think about them out of the AAC. 35-point favorite against East Carolina. You know what? I might want to lay that. They've won all 4 games this year by a 50 to 15 margin. You know what number that is? 35 points. East Carolina is terrible. Central Florida is the best team in the conference. So now you know why it's 35. All right. Let's see. A couple more to go here at night. You might be saying, hey, man, what happened to that 30-minute thing you were talking about? Well, those are for the key games. So, all right. Let's see what else we got here. Let's round this out with Tulane at FIU and Willie Fritz. We've talked about him before in this program. That's a difference maker right there, Willie Fritz. Because look at what Georgia Southern's look what they've done without him, and look what he's building at Tulane. They almost beat Navy on the road. They beat Army at home, and they just crushed Tulsa last week. They're a 13.5-point favorite at FIU. I think they'll crush FIU. I mean, FIU beat Charlotte, Rice, Alcorn by 14 total points. Those aren't good teams. And they got beat by Central Florida and Middle Tennessee State by a combined 98-34. So I think Tulane's going to lay it on them. First ever meeting, and I'm going with Tulane to win big over FIU as a 13-point favorite. And let's see, what else? Another big game for an AAC top team, South Florida. Well, another game for them. 23.5-point favorite against weak Cincinnati. So right now, that little situation, another one of those situations where you have, you have one of those prized assistants leaves Ohio State, gets his opportunity, Luke Fickell, and it ain't working out so far at Cincinnati. They've got some work to do there. They just aren't playing well. They got beat up by Central Florida last week, beat up by Marshall. It's actually the season's kind of gotten away from the last few weeks, to tell you the truth, and it's going to get away with them again here because South Florida is starting to play better. See, Cincinnati got off to a decent start, and they've been playing worse. South Florida, shaky, now they're playing better. So, by the way, South Florida 10-1-1 against the spread their last 12 versus FBS teams as a home favorite. So I would take the Bulls. Go ahead. I'll give the 23. Ohio State's favored by 24 at Nebraska. They beat the Huskers 62-3 last year at the Big Horseshoe. And yeah, this is what Ohio State likes to do. They like to beat up on the innocent. That's what they like to pad the score, make suckers out of the people who put them in the playoffs like they did last year when they didn't deserve it. That's what they're trying to do again. Michigan State and Minnesota. Michigan State fresh off their upset against Michigan. And keep in mind, L.J. Scott may not play for Michigan State. He is their top running back, of course. So you want to keep an eye on Scott potentially not playing. And Minnesota, they've dropped a couple after a nice start on the P.J. Fleck. They're 6-1 in their last 7 as home dogs against the spread. Michigan State, now these two teams haven't played since 2013, but the Spartans have won 4 straight in the series. But this is one where, you know what, Minnesota, I might think about taking them actually, but I don't know. Maybe not. Michigan State favored by 4. I still don't really think Michigan State's all that great. All right, let's see. What else? A couple more to go. New Mexico at Fresno State. And Fresno State, the rebuild is ahead of schedule. And boy, it shouldn't really be a shock either. I said it, as you know, for the last couple of years that Fresno State needed to move on from their just terrible coaching situation. They did. They hired a smart guy in Jeff Tedford, and Tedford is going to do a really good job here. You could already tell. I mean, this is a program that won 4 games the last 2 years combined. He's come here, and in 1 year, he's already won 3 games. So now they haven't beaten anybody. I get that. But, hey, their only 2 losses this year are at Alabama and at Washington. So Fresno's playing a lot better. 1.5-point favorite at home. But New Mexico is more established. Okay, they've been a more consistent, better team than Fresno over the last few years. They've had a week off to prepare. They hammered Air Force a few weeks ago. So I just think New Mexico is a better team. Again, I like what's going on with Fresno, but this would be Fresno's best win. I don't know if they can do that, but maybe they can. We'll see. Tedford's doing a nice job there. That could be an interesting outcome. Moving on to the last game And that's Nevada at Colorado State. Colorado State, one of the top teams in the Mountain West Conference, favored by 24 against Nevada. Okay, so that will wrap her up. Now, injuries, let me just quickly run through, see if some of the injuries that we'll be posting up on the report that I did not mention. Charlotte, their number one running back, Benny LeMay, is out with a concussion. He's got about almost 500 yards rushing. They're taking on Western Kentucky, so make a note of that. Houston, their number one receiver, Linnell Bonner, did not play last week, may not play this week, got a concussion at Tulsa. Bonner was a 98 reception, 1,100-yard receiver last year for Houston. So that would be a significant enough injury that we wanted to let you know. Here's another significant injury we want to talk about. Iowa State. Now, when Iowa State beat Oklahoma last week for the big upset, they did not do it with Jacob Park at quarterback. Here's another situation where all of a sudden you get a quarterback and Iowa State's offense is kind of muddling and they're inconsistent. Well, Jacob Park has a leave of absence. Okay, now why? Nobody knows. Leave of absence. All right, something's going on there. So he's gone. In steps senior backup Kyle Kempt, making his first career start for the Cyclones. And what does he do? He goes 18 of 24, 343 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no picks in upsetting Oklahoma in Norman. So, needless to say, I don't think they need Jacob Park anymore, at least for this week. So, anyway, keep an eye, though, on Willie Harvey as well, the linebacker for Iowa State, who led them in tackles last year, has a hamstring injury and did not play last week against Oklahoma, may not play this week, but they're playing Kansas. So, but Kansas, by the way, is also dealing with an injury. Khalil Herbert, their leading rusher with 500 yards rushing, 503 to be exact, has a hamstring injury, so he may not play in the game. Let's see, other injuries we want to mention for you here of significance. And I'm only going to mention the ones that I might be a little bit more significant. The other ones will, again, you can take a look at the ones up on our when we post it on the website, either tonight or definitely before noon tomorrow. Miami of Ohio quarterback Gus Ragland will not play at Kent State. Ragland's been there for a couple of years. Billy Ball, who was the top quarterback in 2015, played a lot better last year. Didn't play all year, but played a little bit last year, and he played better because the program's been playing better. Last week, though, just 8 of 17, 119 yards in that loss to Bowling Green when Ragland got hurt. So that's a big loss. I mean, Ragland's an important quarterback for them. He had a 17-1 touchdown to interception ratio last year, and 12-4 this year. But they are at Kent, and Kent's pretty bad. But then again, so was Bowling Green. All right, let's see. Any more here? No. And we mentioned those, and we mentioned those, and we mentioned those. So there you go. All right, so there's other injuries of note, but we'll save that for the website report. That'll wrap it up, though, for what we're doing here on today's show. So let's see. Where are we? Let me get this set up here. Okay, so don't forget that, as we said in the very beginning, check out our NFL show that we have available with Tony Mejia. It's already on demand and ready to go. And that is every Thursday. So our Week 5 preview is out and ready. And you can check that out on our website at ourlads.com. You can also check it out on the YouTube page, which is on the Prime Sports Network, or the iTunes page, which is also under Prime Sports Network. And you can also check out ourlads.com for our content, not only the injury reports, but everything else we throw out there, including our fantasy coverage. Go to our blog page under ourlads.com or our fantasy page. That's where you can check everything out. But really, if you go to the blog page, everything's there, including fantasy and NFL and college football coverage. And if you didn't already know, the best depth charts in the business are at ourlads.com, not just for the NFL, but college football. Follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. We'll see you tomorrow Not sure when, but possibly tomorrow morning for our fantasy football coverage with Jamal Murphy. That's our final show of the week. And then we will talk to you again on Monday when we recap the weekend in the NFL and college football, starting at 6 o'clock on Monday night and every Monday night. So again, thanks for checking in with us. We'll see you on we'll see you next Friday from our college football coverage, and we'll see you next Thursday for you NFL guys as we preview Week 7 in the NFL. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the games, and enjoy the games tonight as well.